Hey coin lovers! Today we're diving into the fascinating history of the Lincoln cent during America's bicentennial era and revealing the top 4 bicentennial Lincoln cents that could be hiding serious value. First up, in 2009, the United States Mint launched a historic coin series to honor the 200th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. And what emerged was one of the most talked about modern cent releases in recent history. Among the 4 designs, the birth and early childhood Lincoln cent, released first in the series, captured collectors' attention with its powerful simplicity and deep historical meaning. But what makes the 2009 birth and early childhood Lincoln bicentennial cent, uncirculated, so special? What is its origin, design, and current value in today's coin market? Let's take a journey through its full story. No gaps, no headlines, just the complete truth from the copper up. Soft transition, coin spinning slowly in 3D. The 2009 Lincoln Bicentennial Series was introduced to commemorate 2 important moments, the 200th anniversary of Lincoln's birth and the 100th anniversary of the Lincoln cent itself, which first appeared in 1909. The series featured 4 unique reverse designs representing different chapters of Lincoln's life: his birth and childhood in Kentucky, his formative years in Indiana, his professional life in Illinois, and his presidency in Washington, D.C. The first coin in the series, released on February 12, 2009, was the birth and early childhood in Kentucky design. This reverse shows a simple yet deeply symbolic log cabin, the very structure where Lincoln was, born in 1809 near Hodgenville, Kentucky. Designed by Richard Masters and sculpted by Jim Licoretz, the log cabin is a tribute not just to Lincoln's beginnings, but also to the enduring values of humble origins, family, and perseverance. The obverse, or front, of the coin continued to feature the classic Victor D. Brenner portrait of Lincoln that had appeared on all cents since 1909. This blend of old and new was intentional, linking the past century of Lincoln cent production to the story of the man behind the face. But there's something more important that happened in 2009. For the first time in decades, the U.S. Mint produced Lincoln cents using 2 different compositions, one for circulation and one for collectors. The circulating coins, which were made for general use, were struck in the same zinc core with copper plating that had been used since 1982, totaling just 2.5% copper. But the uncirculated collector versions, like the one we're focusing on today, were made from a special composition of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, a respectful nod to the original 1909 wheat cent alloy. These were sold by the Mint in special sets and not intended for general circulation, which makes them more desirable and valuable to collectors. Each uncirculated coin is carefully struck using higher pressure and polished dies to create a sharper, more lustrous finish. When kept in pristine condition, ideally still in mint packaging, these coins maintain their full red color and show off the intricate wood grain detail in the log cabin, the layered roof shingles, and the foliage surrounding the structure. Now let's talk mintage numbers. In total, the U.S. Mint produced 284.4 million of the 2009 birth and early childhood cents for circulation, with 350 million coins struck at the Philadelphia Mint and over 129 million at the Denver Mint. However, the uncirculated 95% copper versions were released as part of the Mint's 2009 uncirculated coin sets, and their numbers are significantly lower. The final mintage for these collector-only cents is just 784,614 sets, which includes all 4 bicentennial designs in the 95% copper alloy. Because of this limited mintage and their superior quality, uncirculated 2009 birth and early childhood Lincoln cents are highly collectible, especially in mint state grades like MS67 red or higher. So what about value? As of today, A raw, uncirculated 2009 birth and early childhood Lincoln cent made of 95% copper typically sells for $1 to $3 when taken from mint sets. However, graded examples, those certified and slabbed by third-party graders like PCGS or NGC, command higher prices. Next up, the 1981 D Washington quarter is one of those coins that you've likely handled dozens of times without thinking twice. But as with many pieces of modern U.S. coinage, its story and potential value go far beyond its modest 25-cent face value. Struck at the Denver Mint, indicated by the small D mint mark on the reverse beneath the eagle's talon, this coin had an enormous mintage of over 575 million pieces. That massive output reflects the U.S. economy's needs at the time, as quarters remained one of the most widely circulated coins in the country. Because of this, the 1981 D is not considered rare in general, at least not in circulated condition, but it holds value in its history, design, and in exceptional examples. By 1981, the Washington quarter had already been in use for nearly 50 years. First issued in 1932 to commemorate the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth, the quarter's obverse design was created by sculptor John Flanagan. His rendition of Washington's profile had become a fixture in American wallets and cash registers. The reverse design, showing the eagle perched on a bundle of arrows with olive branches underneath, represented a message of strength and peace. While nothing about the design had changed in 1981, the historical context had evolved. America was emerging from a period of economic uncertainty, and coin production remained steady to meet everyday transaction needs. The 1981 D quarter is composed of copper-nickel clad, a copper core, with outer layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel. This was the standard composition for quarters ever since silver was removed from regular circulation coins after 1964. Therefore, the 1981 D quarter does not contain any silver content, and circulated examples are generally only worth face value. However, the story changes when you consider uncirculated and high-grade examples. Coins graded MS65, meaning mint state with minimal marks and strong luster, typically sell for $10 to $15. Those in MS66 or MS67, which are much harder to find due to the mass production and handling over time, can fetch $75 to $200 or more, especially when certified by professional grading services like PCGS or NGC. The key to finding value in a 1981 D quarter is all in the condition. A coin fresh from a mint roll or sealed U.S. mint set is more likely to retain the detail and surface quality collectors demand. Look for sharp strikes, clean fields, and no contact marks, which are the dings and scratches that come from coins, bumping against each other in bags or jars. Coins with exceptional eye appeal, that combination of strong luster and crisp detail, always bring premium prices at auction. There are also known errors and varieties associated with 1981 D quarters. Though not extremely common, collectors have reported off-center strikes, die cracks, and even some minor doubling on the obverse lettering, particularly around the words "Liberty" and "In God We Trust." One of the more intriguing finds is the struck-through error, where foreign material on the die can cause unusual texture or missing elements on the coin's surface. While minor errors might only add a few dollars to the coin's value, dramatic errors, such as major off-center strikes or broad strikes, can be worth $100 or more depending on severity and condition. From a collector's perspective, the 1981 D quarter also marks the tail end of the traditional Washington quarter series. By the end of the 1990s, this design would be replaced by the popular 50-state quarters program, which sparked a renewed interest in collecting and brought millions of new enthusiasts into the hobby. As such, quarters from the late 1970s and early 1980s are now being re-examined not just for nostalgia, but for collectability, particularly in top condition and with interesting errors. Next up, the 1995 P. Washington quarter is a familiar sight to many Americans, a coin you've likely spent, dropped in a tip jar, or found under the couch cushions. But beneath its everyday appearance lies an interesting story of U.S. minting, history, and a few surprises that make it worth more than face value to the right collector. The P mint mark, located just to the right of George Washington's ponytail on the obverse, stands for the Philadelphia Mint, which struck over 1.1 billion of these coins in 1995. That enormous mintage means the coin is very common in circulated condition. But rarity isn't always about how many were made. Sometimes it's about how many survived in pristine form. By 1995, the Washington quarter design had been in use for over 6 decades. Created by John Flanagan in 1932 to honor the 200th birthday of George Washington, the coin's obverse had become an American icon. The reverse featured the eagle, wings outstretched, perched on a bundle of arrows with olive branches below, a blend of strength and peace that defined American symbolism. This design remained unchanged until the turn of the millennium, making the 1995 P one of the last issues before the design revolution of the 50-state quarters program in 1999. It belongs to that final chapter of traditional Washington quarters, a detail that appeals to collectors today. In terms of metal content, the 1995 P is a copper-nickel-clad coin with a core of pure copper and outer layers of a copper-nickel alloy. There is no silver in this coin, which means its intrinsic metal value is below face value. However, numismatic value, the value given by collectors, can boost its worth significantly, especially in uncirculated condition. In average circulated condition, the 1995 P quarter is worth exactly 25 cents. But in mint state, particularly at high grades like MS-65 and above, its value begins to rise. A certified MS-65 coin might sell for $5 to $10. At MS-66, that jumps to around $20. And in MS-67, a relatively rare grade for a modern high mintage quarter, it can fetch $100 to $200 or more, depending on demand and overall eye appeal. What makes high-grade 1995 P quarters so hard to find is not rarity from the mint, but the rough journey these coins take once they enter circulation. Contact marks, scratches, and loss of luster are common. Collectors prize coins that retain sharp details, especially in Washington's hair and the eagle's feathers. If you're looking through mint sets or unopened rolls from 1995, you may have a better shot at locating a pristine example. But there's another layer of intrigue, errors and varieties. While not as famous as some older coins, the 1995 P quarter has a few error types that have captured collector interest. Some coins were struck with misaligned dies, creating a noticeable shift in design or rim thickness. Others show signs of die cracks, cuds, or weak strikes, all results of worn equipment at the mint. While minor errors might bring only a small premium, dramatic ones, like off-center strikes or double strikes, can command $50 to $200 or more, depending on severity and condition. Always inspect coins with a magnifying glass or loupe, because these small details can mean big differences in value. One interesting fact about 1995 in U.S. coin history is that this year also saw the famous 1995 doubled die Lincoln cent, a coin that drew national attention for its bold doubling on the four words liberty and in God we trust. While no widely recognized doubled die varieties have been confirmed for the 1995 P quarter on the same scale, the renewed public interest in coins that year led many to look closely at all their change, including their quarters, just in case a similar variety existed. So what does it all mean for the 1995 P Washington quarter today? If you've got one in your pocket, it's probably worth a quarter. But if you've got one in uncirculated condition, maybe from a mint set or saved roll, it could be worth several dollars or more depending on the grade. And if you find an error or variety, that could take the value even higher. It's a modern coin, yes, but one that sits at the crossroads of design history, mass production, and the dawn of a new era in American coinage. It may not be rare, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth collecting. Next up, the 1982 D Washington quarter is one of those coins that seems to show up in old jars, couch cushions, and forgotten drawers. Often scratched, discolored, or worn nearly smooth, these coins tell a quiet story, not just of George Washington or the U.S. Mint, but of decades of everyday life, pocket to pocket. And even in bad condition, the 1982 D quarter holds value, not necessarily in dollars, but in history and hidden potential. Struck at the Denver Mint, identified by the small D mint mark on the reverse beneath the eagle's tail, the 1982 D quarter was minted during a challenging time for the U.S. economy. Over 480 million of these coins were produced, a huge number, yet still lower than other years before and after. The early 1980s saw a recession, high unemployment, and inflation. The U.S. Mint, responding to budget cuts and reduced demand for certain coin sets, actually stopped producing uncirculated mint sets in 1982 and 1983. That decision would later make high-quality examples from those years much harder to find, and thus more valuable to collectors. But let's be clear. A 1982 D quarter in bad condition, meaning heavily worn, scratched, or discolored, is worth about face value, 25 cents. It has no silver content, as it is made from the standard copper-nickel-clad composition introduced in 1965, a copper core with layers of copper and nickel bonded on the outside. In poor condition, the metal value is even less than the face value, but that doesn't mean the coin is meaningless. What makes 1982 D quarters interesting, even in bad shape, is the context. Since there were no official mint sets in 1982, finding high-grade examples today is surprisingly tough. That means collectors often turn to circulated coins as the only option when filling this spot in their collection. Even though your heavily worn 1982 D quarter isn't going to make headlines, it still fills a gap in the historical timeline of U.S. coinage. It's a placeholder for a time when mint production was disrupted, and for collectors working on circulated sets, even well-used examples are needed to complete the picture. In addition, even bad-condition 1982 D quarters can sometimes turn out to be error coins, and this is where things can get more exciting. One well-known and collectible variety is the No Mint Mark 1982 quarter, which applies only to the Philadelphia Mint, not the Denver D version, but it sparked a wave of interest in 1982 quarters in general. With the public paying more attention to coins that year, error coins from all mints, including Denver, were more closely examined. On 1982 D quarters, some collectors have discovered off-center strikes, die cracks, and even clipped planchets, which can fetch $10 to $100 or more depending on severity and eye appeal, even in worn condition. Another factor to consider is nostalgia and historical relevance. The early 1980s were a time of transition in America, politically, economically, and culturally. Quarters from that era have now circulated for over 40 years. A beat-up 1982 D quarter might have paid for a cup of coffee in the 80s, spent time in vending machines in the 90s, and sat quietly in someone's change drawer ever since. Its condition might be poor, but its journey is long. In the numismatic world, grade is everything. A 1982 D quarter in Mint State 65 might sell for $20 to $30, and in MS 67 condition, values can spike to over $150. But those are coins that were saved right away, protected from wear and tear. Most 1982 D quarters, especially the ones we find in everyday circulation today, are worn down with smooth rims, faded details, and surface damage. That doesn't mean they should be ignored. It just means their value lies more in story than in dollars. So if you're holding a 1982 D Washington quarter in rough shape, it probably won't make you rich. But it's still a fascinating piece of American history. It reminds us of a time when coin production was scaled back, when the economy was tight, and when even the U.S. Mint had to make budget cuts. And in a way, that gives even the dirtiest old quarter some real character. Next up, the 1974 Washington quarter might not look special at first glance. You've probably seen hundreds of them in your lifetime, tossed into vending machines, handed over at gas stations, or buried in change jars across America. But even a common coin like this has a story, one that stretches back to our nation's founding ideals, touches on mid-20th century design, and hints at hidden value for collectors and historians alike. The Washington quarter was originally introduced in 1932 to commemorate the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. What was meant to be a one-year commemorative coin quickly became a permanent part of American currency. The design, created by John Flanagan, features a dignified portrait of Washington facing left on the obverse, with the word "Liberty" above and the motto "In God We Trust" to the left. The reverse shows a heraldic eagle with wings spread wide, clutching a bundle of arrows and resting on a pair of olive branches, a symbol of strength and peace. By the time 1974 came around, this design had become deeply embedded in the American consciousness. But this was also a period of change and uncertainty. The United States was still grappling with the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the unfolding Watergate scandal. Inflation was rising, and conversations were beginning about redesigning American coinage to reduce costs. In fact, 1974 was the year just before the nation's bicentennial, when new designs for quarters, half dollars, and dollars were being prepared. But the 1974 quarter still carried the original pre-bicentennial design, making it one of the last of its kind before the major changes that would come just a year later. In terms of production, the U.S. Mint struck hundreds of millions of these quarters, over 800 million from the Philadelphia Mint alone, which is why the 1974 quarter does not have a mint mark if it was minted in Philadelphia. The Denver Mint added another 353 million, or so, identified by a small D mint mark to the right of Washington's ponytail. There were no quarters made at the San Francisco Mint for general circulation that year, but proof versions were produced for collectors. The composition of the 1974 Washington quarter is typical of its era. A copper-nickel-clad coin with an inner core of pure copper and outer layers made from a 75% copper, 25% nickel alloy. That means there is no silver in this coin, unlike quarters struck before 1965, which were made of 90% silver. Because of this, most circulated 1974 quarters are worth only their face value, 25 cents. However, condition plays a big role in determining whether your 1974 quarter is worth holding on to. Coins in average circulated condition are extremely common and usually not worth more than face value. But examples in uncirculated condition, especially those graded MS65 and higher, can be worth more. A 1974 quarter in MS65 condition might sell for around $5 to $10. In MS66, that jumps to around $30. And in the rarest grades, MS67 or better, some examples have sold for $150 to $300 or more. These high grades are difficult to find, as even small nicks, discoloration, or weak strikes can bring the grade down. But what really gets collectors excited are error coins, and the 1974 quarter has a few notable ones. Off-center strikes, broad strikes, double dies, and even some struck on the wrong planchet have been discovered. One famous example is a 1974 quarter struck on a nickel planchet, which results in a smaller diameter coin with a lighter weight and weak rim details. These types of errors can fetch anywhere from $50 to several $100 depending on their severity and condition. Another known error is the clipped planchet, where a portion of the coin's edge is missing, typically valued between $10 and $50, depending on how dramatic the clip is. It's also worth noting that in 1974, there were experimental discussions at the Mint about alternative materials, including aluminum. While these experiments were more closely tied to the 1974 Lincoln cent and not the quarter, it's interesting to see how 1974 fits into a broader story of economic and minting transitions in the United States. Next up, at first glance, the 1985 D Washington quarter doesn't seem like much. You've probably held one in your hand, used it at a parking meter, or dropped one into a soda machine. But behind its simple appearance lies a fascinating blend of American history, numismatic value, and subtle details that collectors quietly seek out. So let's take a closer look at the 1985 D Washington quarter, where it came from, why it matters, and what it might be worth today. The Washington Quarter series began in 1932 to honor the 200th birthday of George Washington. What was meant to be a one-year commemorative coin turned into a permanent fixture of U.S. coinage. Designed by sculptor John Flanagan, the obverse of the coin features a classic portrait of Washington facing left with the words "Liberty" above and the national motto, "In God We Trust," to his left. The reverse carries an image of a heraldic eagle perched on a bundle of arrows with two olive branches beneath, symbols of military readiness and peace. By 1985, the Washington quarter had already been in circulation for over half a century. That year, the United States Mint produced quarters in Philadelphia and Denver, with the D Mint mark representing the Denver Mint, located in Colorado. A staggering 519 million quarters were struck at Denver in 1985, making the 1985 D quarter one of the more common coins of its era. These were intended for heavy circulation, and they've certainly done their job. You'll still find them in pocket change today, nearly 40 years later. The coin is made from a copper-nickel-clad composition, a pure copper core sandwiched between layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel. This gives the coin its familiar silvery appearance, but without any silver content. In fact, by 1985, it had been 20 years since the U.S. removed silver from its circulating quarters, starting in 1965. So unless it's a special error or, in exceptional condition, a 1985 D quarter in your change today is still worth its face value, 25 cents. But as every collector knows, value is never just about the date. It's about condition, rarity, and sometimes the unexpected. In average circulated condition, the 1985 D quarter is extremely common and generally not worth more than face value. But in uncirculated condition, meaning no scratches, no wear, and brilliant luster, the story changes. Coins graded MS-65. Mint State 65, which show strong strikes and very few contact marks, can sell for $5 to $10. In MS-66, that value jumps to around $15 to $25. And in the rare top condition of MS-67, collectors have paid upwards of $150 to $200, though only a small number of coins survive in that grade due to the mass production process and handling. What about rare errors? While the 1985 D quarter doesn't have any ultra-famous or high-profile errors tied to it, there are still some error varieties out there that collectors hunt for. These include off-center strikes, doubled dies, broad strikes, and clipped planchets. An off-center strike where part of the design is missing could be worth $25 to $100, depending on how dramatic the error is. A coin struck on a defective or misaligned planchet might also sell for more, especially if it's in decent condition. Another reason collectors pay attention to 1985 D quarters is the general scarcity of well-preserved coins from the 1980s. In 1982 and 1983, the U.S. Mint did not produce uncirculated mint sets, which meant that coins from those years and even the following ones were heavily circulated with fewer preserved examples. That pattern continued into 1985, making high-grade survivors from the Denver Mint somewhat more desirable for those building complete, high-grade date and mint mark sets. So if you come across a 1985 D quarter in your change, and it's heavily worn, the rim flattened, the details soft, the luster long gone, it's safe to say it's worth just 25 cents. But if you find one that looks almost brand new, untouched by time or fingers, it might be worth pulling aside. And if you're lucky enough to spot an unusual error or a sharp strike with flawless surfaces, you may just be holding a coin worth several times its face value.